So really, very quickly, in 6 months, from everything looking quite rosy, I was suddenly sat in a police cell, but I had no tool set. Hadn't done any real, hadn't really looked into mental health or even really thought about it. If you're sitting in a car and you're just hitting the, revving the engine, that's like your body, and that's burning. Obviously, if you do that on a car, you're going to burn it out, and it's the same as you as your body. Like, how can you lower your brain waves? And a lot of this comes back to stuff around meditation and breath work and taking some time out, because then you can actually critically, you can creatively think better.
I would listen to, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger, like he would say like sleep faster. And then I would experiment how I can sleep less and do more. I was like, okay, Arnold said sleep faster, so sleep less, work more. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do that because he's super successful, but actually that never has worked for me. Like maybe something that works for somebody can work for them, but you have to then figure out what's works the best for you. Welcome to the Relancer podcast, where we talk about talent acquisition topics. I'm Eero, the co-founder of Relancer, the platform where employers connect with freelancer recruiters. Today we have James, and we will be talking about mental health and burnout in talent acquisition. Welcome, James.
Hey, Eero, how you doing? Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and looking forward to it.
So I think we first met in like 2020 when COVID started or something, because we started Relancer about that time. So basically before COVID. And back then, I think you were still in talent acquisition.
Exactly, yes. I think around that sort of time, I was just doing some work for Octopus Ventures and helping out some of their portfolio companies and working with a couple of their startups. So I was doing that, and then obviously once COVID hit, then I ended up joining Meta, and was there ultimately until last year. So pretty much 3 years in the scaling from. Predominantly on research science, AI and machine learning stuff. So yeah, it was super interesting.
And now you're in a new journey, and so what's your experience with mental health?
I guess in a way it's relatively new to a certain extent. Time flies quite quickly. So, but yeah, back in sort of 2017, I didn't really have a lot of awareness around mental health, if I'm honest. I just was, maybe sort of getting on with life, thinking everything was fine. And then things change. Sometimes you get a massive, it could be a curveball. It could be, I particularly call them like graduation events of life, which take you off in a different direction. I was, as I say, I obviously went through a loss of a dad, then a loss of a son, and they came very, very quickly together. And I obviously didn't have any tool set then, and then actually was then accused of a crime I hadn't done. So really, very quickly, in 6 months, from everything looking quite rosy, I was suddenly sat in a police cell, but I had no tool set. I hadn't done any real, hadn't really looked into mental health or even really thought about it. And the challenge of that is when you go from that situation with no tool set, you instantly go to the lowest common denominator, which is suicide, really, because you have no concept of really what's happening. So I spent a lot of time in that mindset, in that place, because I didn't have the particular tool set, and it was only really as I started to get a little bit more knowledge. And starting to look into this a little bit more and start working with people. And I instantly called like the Samaritans, which is a mental health charity here in the UK. There's other ones, but that was one particularly I called. Then I got a counsellor. Then I went to therapy. Then I did all these, and then you kind of progress. Then you understand tools, and then you start putting practices into place. And that's how kind of my journey evolved into now, going through that 2021 and actually being a certified coach and helping people from a life coaching mindset, transformational type perspective, and so that's kind of my journey through the mental health, coming from it from a very low place, not having any awareness, to suddenly being in this position where I'm trying to help people who are encountering similar challenges.
You have been, in a way, of course, I have never been so low in my life. I have experienced like burnout. I think I had it also like in 2015, quite early, like let me think, when I did my first startup. Basically, when I did my first startup, of course, there is like there is a very interesting thing I think with about mental health in general, or success or something, like when somebody starts to like sets a goal to fly high, let's say. Of course, you don't have to do the big things to burn out and so on. But what I experienced myself was that it's there is a lot of information out there that is in a way misguiding, and maybe it works for somebody, but I can give you an example. So when I started, I would listen to a lot of motivational stuff, and then like I would listen to, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger, like he would say like sleep faster. And then I would experiment how I can sleep less and do more. And for me, it never worked. It never worked. And then until I got to the point when I read this book that it's called Why Do We Sleep? And then a sleep scientist will explain what sleep is and why it's essential and so on. And basically, there is like less than 1% in the world who can basically operate on less than 7 and 8 hours of sleep. So for me, like I probably don't have that gene to have less, and for me to try to like have less sleep, which is like the fundamental of life to recover, it would never work out. But I was like, okay, Arnold said sleep faster, so sleep less, work more. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that because he's super successful, and I'm going to try to copy that. But actually, that never has worked for me. Like, so it can be misguiding, and maybe something that works for somebody can work for them, but you have to, in the end, figure out what's works the best for you. Like,
Exactly. We're all human. We're all different and brought up in certain different environments, all at different sort of ages as well. And some key things happen in certain areas. I mean, I think generally the fundamental things are, I know sleep is paramount, and that could be 6 hours, it could be 7 hours, it could be 8 hours. Some people obviously, venture between those, but it's the quality of sleep. Sometimes it's the actual quality of sleep. That's one thing I took into it, is I probably sometimes sleep around about sort of 6 hours, sometimes even between 5 to 6 hours, which can be seen as less, but I track my sleep and I actually go into a deep sleep, and I track it. So I understand that even though it is only 5 or 6 hours, is actually such a deep level that I am really really sort of helping my body. Where some people can sleep for 7, 8 hours, but actually it's quite a light sleep, and it's actually the quality is not that good. And then obviously, that just there's many determining factors as well. I mean, things, the food you eat, if you're drinking alcohol, all these type of things will impact your sleep. So that's one of the things I do recommend people, is to actually track their quality of sleep and see how well they're actually, how deep, they are going, and how quickly they can fall asleep as well. I think that's also a key thing. But as you say, there's a lot of information out there. And we live in the information age now, with a touch of a button, we have access to so much knowledge now. But the challenge, obviously, what I found with that is that people are overwhelmed with information, but very much crying out for transformation. And it's very difficult sometimes to get that, because everyone's sort of saying, do this, and there's many different views. And we're each, we're all different, from a human perspective. So I think the biggest changes I ever had in my journey was when I actually was working with someone individually, because then they can kind of, point you in the right direction. You can follow you on a particular path. It is very difficult doing it on your own, even though we do live in so much information and YouTube and all this type of stuff, that you can get a lot of great knowledge.
coming back to talent acquisition, so what do you think are the main factors that contribute to burnout, specifically in this profession?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I always try to speak from personal perspective. So I think obviously it's high pressure, isn't it? I mean, depending on where you are, there's so many roles that need to be filled, especially on the technical. I mean, I'm very much come from the technical perspective, so they're challenging positions when you're dealing with head of engineering roles or architectural roles or data, machine learning type positions or research science type roles, which I kind of was doing. But I do remember when I was at, a partner at Seed, I used to work with many different sort of startups at any one time. And so I had like, potentially 2, 3 or 4 hiring plans. I was working with the founders. I had 3 or 4 Slack groups. I had, 3 or 4 emails. So I had a lot going on. Yeah, I kind of wore it as a bit of a badge of honor that I was able to multitask quickly and fill roles and do all this type of stuff. But I had no real awareness of burnout or mental health at that particular stage. And I had massive anxiety, but I didn't realize it because I just didn't have the awareness. What I understand now is that it is paramount to have a personal regime of how you are actually feeling in those particular times when you're feeling, you can only kind of feel the stress, the anxiety, the overleading. There's a lot of pressure, and what tool sets can you implement, throughout those particular processes, so you can kind of calm. Ultimately, it's about calming your nervous system. I work on brain waves predominantly, because when you're able to lower your brain waves through things like breath work and meditation, you open up more of a creative thinking. And a lot of the time, if you're always operating in a high beta brainwave, which you are generally, if you are, burnout, it's like a car. If you're sitting in a car and you just hitting the, revving the engine, that's like your body, and that's burnt. And obviously, if you do that on a car, you're going to burn it out, and it's the same as you as your body. Like, how can you lower your brainwaves? And a lot of this comes back to stuff around meditation and breath work and taking some time out, because then you can actually critically, you can creatively think better, and which is obviously going to help you in the job you've got, when you've got multiple roles to fill and pressure, to fill those positions or to get people into the pipeline. So I think it's always about, how do you feel, having tool sets in place, but secondly, prioritizing what needs to be done. Not, I used to just be very reactive, stuff coming in, just dipping into certain things at any one time, whereas actually it's better to have some sort of structure in place. So I'm going to focus on this role for the first 2 hours of my morning, and then once that's done, I'm going to then move on to this one, and I'm going to do that for 2 hours, and kind of have a priority, like a traffic light system of what 3 things you're going to do, say what 3 roles you're going to work on, and then kind of stick to that really. And sometimes you have to be reactive where things come in and there might be different priorities, but it's trying to have some sort of structure in play, and also having some time out, I think, throughout your day to go for a walk, or if you're at home or if you're in the office, go out for a walk, and even take some time for yourself to regulate your breathing and stuff like that, because it's only going to help, even though sometimes it feels counterintuitive when you've got a lot of work on.
I think you touch upon like 2 things. One is there is a lot of roles to fill usually. So very often, what at least for me, what I have experienced is like, if you have to switch between different topics, so it can be roles that are super different. It takes like a toll on the mental that for example, I used to work on 2 businesses at the same time. And then I would do like half day one business, and then I would do half day the second business. And that actually was super exhausting, because the switching because it was so different. So switching from one thing to another can be mentally exhausting. And the other thing, what I think in recruitment specifically, is always there is like this time essence. So it's always, when do you need that new person? Yesterday. And it's always like that, I think. So there is like a quite big pressure on talent acquisition, because everybody else is pushing them, and they can see probably like if they can't get the people in, their own people are struggling. They might be overworking because of that. So there is, in a way, it has to be fast. There is time pressure, and then there is a lot of roles, so it's cognitively quite exhaustive. Like, so at least this is how I see it. Like if something comes into my mind, why it's so stressful or why recruiters can burn out.
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, having different experiences. So, like, for example, when I was obviously like previously at Meta, obviously with the nature of the business and the size of it, then there was like, there's different, even though the roles are very challenging and harder to fill, um, there was different levels. So obviously you have people who are applying for the roles. So people coming in that way. You're getting referrals in a lot of the time. Now, I'm not saying the quality is fantastic, but you have that, those options coming in. And then obviously you have yourself doing an outreach perspective as well. So, the least you have, there's sort of three sort of avenues or where people are coming in, and you can kind of obviously dip in on and prioritize each one on those particular perspectives. And obviously they have and obviously again, the size of the business had a huge database. And so you can obviously, search through previous jobs. And so it was difficult, but there was elements of it being also a little bit more easier. But I've worked in like Series A startups where they have no database. They haven't got really referral strategy, particularly in place at the moment. No one's really applying because they're not really heard of the business. So a lot of the pressure is on headhunting and actually being out there. But sometimes it's super attractive business to come in, something which has started, just had funding. So there's different pressures in different nature of the businesses you're working in. But yes, I think working particularly with, on the startup space, it's very, being in that environment it is predominantly very stressful, especially if you're working and you have to, work with different businesses. As you said, you worked with one, you worked with two, and then we did one in the morning, one in the evening, or one in the afternoon. But then you have, there's different, the business is different. You could be going from a product related startup to a crypto business, very, very different, and very different skills, look for very different types of people. And it's about, in those moments or in your day, it's about saying, right, as you say, it's going to be, it's going to be like, I'm going to do this for the morning and this for the evening, or this for the afternoon. And it's balancing it really to say, right, if you do get a couple of people in the pipeline and they're going to interview stage, and you can say, well, I can park that, and then you can switch. And it's just about being able, it is that kind of balancing perspective. And you can never change, ultimately you can't change what's happening. Like, from a outer perspective, there's work to be done, there's jobs to fill, there's clients to work with, or and manage. But the only thing you can do is manage yourself internally. So it's about prioritizing what that looks like for you. It could be working for, head down for 50 minutes, and then it's taking that 10-minute break and it's going for a walk outside, or it's sitting and doing a little bit of breath work, or it's, reading a book, and then it's coming back re-incentivized. But naturally that is counterintuitive, because if we're busy, we'll just sometimes sit at our desk for hours on end. But is that's actually really not that productive, because the mind's burning out and stuff like that. And it's at that point where you go, right, I'm going to take 10-15 minutes and then I'm going to come back again. And it's about putting those things in place, because you can't really change what's coming in from a business perspective and the priorities and the needing to obviously find people. But what you can control is you and how you feel. And it's about having things in place throughout your day. You're doing something you enjoy, you're reading a book, whatever that is, and then you're coming back in and you're replenishing yourself internally. I know I never did that, because I didn't have that awareness then, and I just used to sit at my computer for hours on end. But I used it as a badge of honor. I thought it was good. People used to praise me. I remember the clients used to always come back to me and say, wow, you're so reactive and this is great. And you're responsive on Slack, and you're always responsive on email, and you're finding great candidates. So it was great from their perspective, but actually internally, even though I had no awareness, even though I thought, this is good, I had massive high anxiety, but I just didn't have that awareness then. I had massively high function anxiety. Like I couldn't switch off. I was on it all the time. But the challenge of that is, which I didn't realize again at the time, is I used to obviously look after my son and stuff like that, but I was never present with him because I was always doing stuff. I was always on my phone. I was always sat at a computer, and I see that today with people, and it's when you go through a certain situation, you suddenly realize, well, what was it? That's just not worth it because you're not present with some of the loved ones, or you're not present with with life. It can really have a disempowering perspective on your relationships with with loved ones and life, really, because you're training yourself to be very active. You're training yourself to operate at a certain level, and even though certain people may think that's great for you, and mentally it's actually it's actually not good at all.
Yeah, I have a story about that. So when I had this first small burnout, so I got to the point that I couldn't like work more than 3 or 4 hours a day, maybe less. Like, so there was a period I could focus, and then it got quite bad. And then in the end, basically, I took 1 month off, and I went to India. I went to Vipassana meditation. So it's basically 10 days meditation.
Nice.
And one of the things what I wanted to do is to be more present. Of course, today we have these smartphones and stuff like that. So it makes it a lot harder because you can easily get always this dopamine rush with videos and stuff like that. And also the other thing, I want to learn a little bit patience or something like that. So I always feel that I'm very persistent, but in a way I feel I'm not very patient. So it's in a way they are very different things. So it's weird that no patience, but a lot of persistence. What I learned in the Vipassana part, so it's 10 days. You don't have any phone. You can write. You can talk with anybody, and then you're there. It's super hard. But at some point you will start to see the small things, and you will start to see like ants on the trees, and then you will start to see all the small details. It's super cool. And after that, I think, the most productive time of my life. So just a thing that you can maybe do if somebody wants to try it out, that go meditate for 10 days if you want to learn to be more into the present.
It's super powerful, yeah. I've been looking into doing that again because, yeah, I mean, there's places in the UK. Obviously, I'm talking the UK. I know you're not, but and I say there's places like ashrams in India and stuff like that. But yeah, it's having those times where you can actually take out and do something like that. You can, it's harder to do. I mean, it's harder to do at home. I've done it certain times at home as well. Like for the weekend, I've just completely taken myself off from any electronic devices. It's harder because the temptation's bigger when you do have that solitude and you have no external stimuli coming in. It does become very powerful because we all have some sort of this fog stroke layer over us. Most people are sleeping awake. They're just ran by certain patterns of behavior and they're automated. And they're just running through those, and so that's why a lot of the day is the same, and sometimes life is very similar because it's just running on this sort of treadmill, really, but in this sort of malaise. And it's only really when you kind of take yourself off that and you go to one of those treatments or Vipassana or where you can kind of start to shed a lot of that. And that's why they are very important because, yeah, we unfortunately we live in an age now where we're all connected and people expect you to be connected as well. And again, sometimes people use it as badge of honor. I know I did. I remember when I was on holiday once in Dubai, but I was still working. I was on the beach and I was speaking to candidates and I was closing people and all that type of thought. And everyone was like, "Oh, that's amazing." And I remember thinking, "Oh, this is really good," but I wasn't present. Did I have a good time? I don't really know. It's all about being present for the people you want to spend time with. But unfortunately, if things can happen in life, and you can't get that time back.
I already a little bit talk about what I had in my experience that for some point of time I couldn't focus that much anymore. So 3-4 hours a day. So what are the early maybe signs of burnout for your for maybe somebody to see in themselves or in their teammates?
Different people to look at it different type of ways, really. But it's being able to, you can generally, I mean, like now for me, because I have an awareness, then you can generally spot people, quite a lot quicker, like their energy or how they are interacting, like even their speech, really. Because sometimes when people are operating at, especially at burnout or high stress, their speech is very higher. It's a lot more, it's a lot more fast. So there's certain things you can spot, but so it only really comes from an internal perspective. So internally, the challenge is when you are in very certain high brain waves, like high beta or beta, it's hard to have creative thinking in those particular moments. So for people to really understand is, how do they feel? Are they reacting to things, certain ways? Are they, when they have how many tabs do they actually have open, on their laptop or desktop? Are they flicking through those very, very quickly? Are they always picking up their phone? Are they always checking notifications? These kind of very things which are quite normal for people to do, but ultimately you're training yourself to be reactive. You're training your mind to be like a monkey mind, like it's instantly craving instant gratification. It's wanting to know what the next thing is. It's checking emails, it's checking notifications, it's checking, you're training, but you're training yourself to be like that. And obviously it's when you can realize that you're doing that. I always say to people, only have a couple of tabs open which you're going to be working on. It could be, obviously, I predominantly closed down email because there's no point having that open because you can, that can be closed for an hour or two. But just have obviously, the tab you're working on, maybe, the next one you're working on. So it could be, it could be LinkedIn, for example, and it could be the ATS system you're on. And then don't have your phone near you. Your phone is, ideally, if you're at home, then it's in a different room or it's in your desk drawer, and you're just focused on what you need to do, and you're not reacting to certain things. And all I say to people is like, do that in sort of 20-minute, half an hour slots. So it's like it's kind of intense work or intense focus for a certain period of time, and then take some time, like 5 minutes out. It could be getting water, could be getting a coffee, could be speaking to someone, and then it's coming back and doing it again. But you're training yourself, and if you do have that urge to pick up your phone or to check, Facebook or to check Instagram or Twitter or X or all this type of stuff, always be a pause and say, what am I doing? What is the goal of this? And if it's a goal to to check the news, whatever, or check what's come through, then fine, have that as a goal, but then say, right, I'm going to log out within 5 minutes. Always set yourself, like, don't be reacting just to pick up stuff and do stuff, because you're just training yourself to be burnt out and overwhelmed, really. So it's about having that pause. I always what I introduce to clients is PBTA: pause, breathe, think, act, and just have them write that on their journal each day, PBTA. So they're just pausing, they're breathing, they're thinking, is this the right thing I need to do? And then acting. They're putting a stop there. It stops people, stops them just reacting to things. Because that's really what causes burnout, is over intense. You're just training yourself to be overstimulated.
So what I have noticed, of course, some of that is my own experience. I have, of course, I know people around me, like it's quite common thing, I think, the burnout thing, or experience it somehow. And then maybe it's now it's talked more about. So some of the things what I have seen is, one is like you mentioned, you can't switch off anymore. Like your workday is over, but in the evenings you're still like thinking about work, or you're
Yeah.
maybe checking still the email. You were
Yeah.
talking about the vacations, still doing work basically. So you
Yeah.
can't switch off anymore. Like, and that usually affects sleep quality. So it's harder to fall asleep,
It
and
does.
if basically sleep quality goes down, then you're gonna have like other effects. You will have like less energy to do stuff. You will have it's gonna be harder to concentrate. I really well know when I haven't slept well. Like I will start searching for words in my mind and can't find them. Like I can't get them. Like then I actually know that okay, I'm not probably like sleeping very well. So this concentration part is definitely a thing. Like I mentioned, for me, few hours I could do like that. That was already a sign that okay, something is off here. Like and then like if it goes for a long time, then you can get to like a depression part. That means basically you will have like no emotions, that you don't feel anything about stuff. But before that, it probably is that with basically with less of sleep, you will have like swings of emotions, meaning like you're very like happy at some point, and then you're like super sad. So before I think comes the swings, and the next step from there can be that you just don't give a shit anymore. You just don't feel anything. Like so, I think these are some of the examples that at least I have seen that are like either signs, or maybe you're already into that burnout.
It's very what is really important is be able to, is to set yourself up morning and evening. Really, I think it's one of the, it can be somewhat basic, but in actual fact, it's a lot of people, predominantly people, don't do this. So, like in the evening, as an example, so say you go to bed at, let's say 10 or 11 o'clock, then at 9, the hour before you're going to go to bed, then obviously electronic items away, so you're not checking your phone, you're not checking your desktop, you're not on you, anything like that. And then that hour beforehand, it's that kind of wind down. And whatever that looks like for you, it could be, I mean, I used, don't do it as much as I used to, but I used to then do like 20 minutes of stretching. Used to do like, get out and do some stretching exercises, because there's an app, and just go like, so do some like sort of yoga type stretching, breathing. Okay, so that was like 20 minutes. Then I'd be sit and do, like a 5 or 10 minute sort of meditation. And then I'd just start reading, get a book and just start reading for, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it could be half an hour. And then it would be kind of a lights off. So it was kind of a real wind down of going in, going into sleep. Obviously, the worst thing you can do is to be checking your phone or all this type of stuff, and then or watching TV, like being overstimulated. Like it's the worst thing to do before going to bed. And that's why people generally do have poor sleep. So having setting yourself up to win before going to bed. It could even be writing your to-do list the next day. You could say, right, finish here, right, tomorrow I'm going to do these are my 3 things I'm going to do tomorrow. Not people sometimes have like this massive list of what they want to do, and it's just overwhelming because they're never going to complete it. Actually, what you want to do is build confidence. So you want to set yourself like 2 or 3 things that you're going to do, which you can kind of know you're going to do. You may, after a while, you might have a stretch target, but in general, you want to set yourself up to build that confidence. So you want to set 3 things which you can, you can do. And so you're kind of setting up your next day the night before. But then obviously when you do wake up in the morning, whatever that time that is, you're not waking up and on your alarm, and then you're having to, that you're rushing around, like you're dashing around doing that. That's again super not the way to do it. It's about sort of saying, right, this is what I need to do tomorrow morning. So I'm going to like set my alarm an hour beforehand. And so when I do wake up, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like a little bit of gratitude. I'm going to be grateful for, really for, for waking up, for, whatever that may be, we can be grateful for anything from, from breathing to living, having a roof over our head, anything like that. But touching into gratitude, as quickly as possible. Maybe reading something inspirational. Could be a book. Could be could be an audio. Could be could be a meditation as well. So that first hour is quite gentle. It's getting into the day, because I always say to people, even if you work at home, but instantly once you open your laptop, you turn on your phone, you check your notifications, you walk out your front door, you're reacting then. Like, life is then going to come at you, and there's going to be an email which may throw you off track, or there's going to be a notification which you don't like, or like maybe in talent acquisition, a candidate's pulled out for an interview, or a candidate's rejected an offer, like that. And if you're instantly starting your day seeing that, it's a really bad way. And I used to do that. And the first thing I used to do is check my phone, see what's come through, see if there's any emails come through overnight, all that type of. But had no real. But it was just training yourself to be high anxiety, high burnout. Whereas actually, if you can put something in the night before and the morning before, then when you do open up, you're setting yourself up to win. So when that thing does come in, you see it at a completely different level. You're not reacting to stuff. You don't think it's a bad thing, because you think you've done the hard graft in the morning, by lowering those brain waves, being in a calm state. And so I think for me personally, is to really have an evening routine and a morning routine, like at least an hour buffer. And before a evening, shutting down all electronic items, and in the morning, not even looking at electronic items until you've gone through a set process. It could be an hour, could be even 2 hours if you include exercise as well. So when you do see stuff, you're looking at it from a different perspective. Whereas if you're just waking up, instantly picking up your phone, looking to see what's come through, I mean, you're programming yourself, because you're still awake subconsciously, and you're just programming yourself for a bad day ultimately.
Yeah, one interesting thing you mentioned was the alarm clock. So actually, I haven't used the alarm clock for years. And of course, there is one of the things is that if you have a good sleep and waking up routine, if you go to the bed at the same time, then you basically wake up the same time most of the times, unless you do something, I don't know, something exhaustive, run a marathon, for example, maybe then you sleep more. But what's the benefit of that is that I used to have this, that maybe in a sleeping cycle, the alarm clock would basically start. And then, of course, you should probably have something mild, but I would have something and my heart would start beating super high, because I would wake up at middle of sleep, and then my heart would be beating, and that's that's not very good way to start the day. If you wake up and your heart is your pulse is already up.
It's like just shocking your system. And again, people think, oh, that's a good thing, and I need that, that real do. But it's not. But again, you're reacting to a situation, and ultimately shock. You're shocking the system. Oh my god, what's that? It's like, sometimes when if you're at a hotel or whatever, and the fire alarm goes off at night time, and it's just like, it's a panic mode. You put yourself into that. That's the element of shock. And if you're waking up to that, it's not going to help you throughout the day at all, or even for it's going to be ultimately, I always say, as humans, we're programmable by design. That's just where nature of you. You put yourself into any environment, it will adapt. If you want to go and eat McDonald's every day, your body doesn't care. It's gonna adapt. It's not going to adapt to what you want it to be, but it's going to adapt. It's like if you put it in the gym, it's going to adapt. But it's the same as your mind. You're programming every day through the content you watch, through the TV you consume, to anything you're doing. So you have to understand that, if you're checking your phone before bed, picking up your phone in the morning, even throughout the night, you wake up and you check your phone. People done that. I've done that. So it's not, so you're just programming yourself to be in that state, and it's very easy to do. When personally, like when I went, obviously getting in this space, I get fascinated by it, and I always like testing things out. And back in 2022, I was about to do like a Navy SEALs Hell Week, which is a 50-hour Hell Week. So 6 months beforehand, I was doing a lot of training, like a lot of training. I was very regimented, morning and sleep and exercise and breath work and yoga exercise, all these types of things. I had a massive process in place for 6 months beforehand. Did the event, completed the event, did the 50 hours. Then I just wanted to see, because I was in the States, how, obviously with the time difference. So once I finished that, I had a couple of days out before I came back to the UK. And that's what I did. I kind of was checking my phone before bed. I was picking up my phone at night time because of the 8-hour time difference, and looking at stuff back here in the UK. I was looking at my phone in the morning, and very quickly I fell into a habit. I remember getting back in UK and I was back into that type of habit. So it just shows how quickly things fall away if you're not disciplined enough. So it's being able to really have a process in place, because again, we're programming ourselves every day for how we want to be internally. So you want to program yourself to an empowering perspective.
What are some good strategies or tools that help you basically, or would help somebody manage stress and prevent burnout?
So again, looking at it, it would be, having some sort of structure in place morning and evening. That's going to be really powerful for you to do that, because you want to be setting yourself up so you are having the right good rest. You don't want interrupted sleep or checking your phone or anything like this, or being on your laptop at least an hour before bed. And then obviously in the morning when you wake up, you want that hour buffer personally to be able to have a calmer, so when you wake up, right, you're not rushing, you're not suddenly dashing out of bed and you dashing in the shower and you then grabbing some breakfast and running out because you're late. You want to have that calmer, natural introduction to your day. They're having something in place where it's it's an hour beforehand, right? Breath work, meditation, some reading. Maybe implement just one or two of those strategies, and then throughout the day, it's being able to be monitor how you're operating. Are you reacting to things? Are you do you have loads of tabs open on your desktop? Are you flicking between things? Are you always checking your phone? Monitor yourself, because this is you programming yourself to be reactive, to burn out, to to operate in a kind of a high stress, high anxiety, which ultimately leads to burnout because your brain waves are operating at such a high level. So how can you lower that? Well, you lower it by having some breath. I say to people, just take some time out and monitor the breath. There's loads of different breath work regimes out there, but all you need to do is literally, you can do this sat at your desk. You don't have to do anything, and you just breathe in through the breathe in and out through your nose. So you breathe in through the nose for 5 seconds. Your belly's slightly going in, and then you breathe out for 5 seconds through the nose. And that's one. And you do that 10 times. So it's just literally just. It's not like, and there's loads of different breath work. And obviously you can't do. It's hard to do that in an office environment, and people feel obviously self-aware, or if they're doing that. But you can actually just sit and just literally at your desk, and you just breathing through the nose for 5, out for that's 1, and do that 10 times. That's a really powerful way, because calming your nervous system down, which is really important. Lowering cortisol in the bloodstream, very important. And so that's a really important way. And then I always say, take some time, especially maybe at lunchtime, or if you do have some time in your day, with be it at home or in office, it's literally sit and just close your eyes, and then just follow your breath, like concentrate on where your breath it could be. So I like doing it on my nose, because you can feel the air coming in and out. And literally I just like sit there, and I just put my attention on my nose and the air coming in and out. And I sit there for yeah, 5-10 minutes, eyes closed. Again, very powerful way, lowering the brain waves, lowering, calming the nervous system. Because this is really what prevents, this is what really causes burnout, when you're high brain waves and your nervous system is just highly strung. So you're very reactive to things. And it's about how you can calm that. And obviously the easiest way to do it is, is breath work, really, and having some time out just to meditate, making sure you think, was one of the things, making sure you're drinking enough water, because that really flushes through the system. And again, most people don't drink enough, like maybe drink a lot of coffee, which is fine, but be careful not drink sugary drinks. You drink, are you powering yourself up on Red Bulls and fizzy drinks? Not really great. Try to obviously coffee's fine. Some people will say no, but I drink a lot of coffees. So I would never say that. But water is very important as well. And I think and again, a lot of it goes down to diet, like what you're eating. Are you eating, fast sugars? Are you eating stuff which gives you that instant boost, but gives you that real high, but then that real low? That plays an important part. So it's about monitoring what you eat as well. Are you eating kind of nutritious, healthy food? Because again, sometimes when we're at work, we're grabbing the easiest thing to eat. At dinner time, and maybe just, obviously we live in an age now with things like Deliveroo and Uber Eats and these type of things, like, people getting, fast food, and because it's easy, because if you've got work to do, or you're feeling, you're feeling like stressed and you've got stuff to do, it's easier to open an app and order some food, and that comes in half an hour, than maybe spending some time out and actually, making a meal for yourself, which again can be very very therapeutic for some people, to do that. So everyone's different, but I'd monitor for sure, like what you're what you're eating and drinking on a daily basis, because that will play an important part as well.
I think one of the things that is super important is creating these good habits. So you're setting yourself for success, like you said, better morning habits, better like evening habits. And also there is what can happen usually is, like, if there is more work or something, you would so basically we have like a circle of life. So there's essential things that are important. It's like our mental, our physical, our like social life. So everything in a way is important. And what usually is, at least I have seen, what starts to happen is, like, if you have more work, or you're working more, you would start to take it away from other parts. And in then that will start to basically affect everything. So it's in a way, if you have these good habits, maintaining like physical movement, you can exercise, or you can just go for a walk, having social life, and then so on. So if those things start to go away, then you will have like also problems. But for example, if I would have like a bigger problem, usually the unknown is the hard part. Like, so for me, what works is like, so if something bad happens in work, for example, I need to make a plan. Like, so if I have a plan, it's fine. It's bad, but I have a plan, so I know how I'm gonna try to basically overcome it. So making a plan is definitely important for me. And then also, I think you mentioned one of the things what you can do if you have a lot of things on the table. Prioritization is super important. So for me also, if I have too much things on my plate, I will get anxiety. I will get stressed. So what I would do, I would just move I would take my to-do list, and I will see, okay, what is important. Like, basically, there is a good book also. There is one thing, I think it was called. So it's basically says, like, what is one thing that you can do that will make everything else better or irrelevant. So you, in a way, try to understand what is important, because you can't do everything, like so. So definitely prioritization.
Yeah, I think it's always about. I think it's important to set yourself up to win. I think sometimes when people, what I notice with people is they put so much on their plate that they can never achieve it, and ultimately through that, you start losing confidence. And even if you're the most confident person in the world, like you see it in sports teams, you see it with sports stars and stuff like that. They quickly can lose confidence if things don't go their way. Confidence is so important in so many things, and when you build that momentum, then it's like a train. Once it's left the station, once it's moving in in the right direction. As long as you don't stop it, then it obviously picks up speed, and you see it with momentum, with again with certain things or certain people or sports teams and stuff. Once they get in a winning habit, and then women becomes a lot easier. And so that's what I say to people is that once you kind of on that train and it's left the station, so you want to keep it moving. So if you do, so if you once you kind of have got your top priorities, down, it could be 1, it could be 2, 3, then once you're hitting them consistently and you're building confidence, you're going in the right direction, then you go, okay, then you may add another one, or you might have it like slightly stretched, and you're just building and building. Where sometimes if people start with so much of a big list, it's never achievable, and then they're finishing the day thinking, oh, I didn't do this, thinking they're thinking more of lack or more disempowering or more negative because they didn't achieve what they wanted to achieve. And then they go to the next day and they're catching the tail, and suddenly that causes again stress, burnout. That cycle will definitely lead that way. So I think it's about starting small and building that momentum. So I think if you're kind of not used to doing this, then just set yourself 1 or 2 key tasks to do, and then as you continue to build upon those, then maybe start adding a little bit more, maybe start stretching yourself when you feel you can. And what I also tell people is, have scenes in your day. So for example, if you get the train to work, or you drive to work, or you get the tube, whatever, like obviously living in London, I've done that tube journey, a lot. And sometimes that can be very stressful, especially if it's late, or tubes don't turn up. And then sometimes we go into work and we're stressed because we had a bad journey into work, and it kind of impacts the whole day a little bit. And what I do say to people is have a scene. So for example, if you do, that journey, whatever happens on that journey, before you actually step into work, you take that sort of, it could be a couple of minutes just to like calm yourself, breathe. And so that's the journey to work is one scene. Then when you step into work, that's another scene. So you've forgotten what the morning was. You're not going in to work based on the fact of a bad journey to work. Then you're in work. And then if things happen in work, things don't go to plan, you take some time out and you come back to your desk and you move on type stuff. You don't let it move too fast. And it's again getting home in the evening, whether you drive, whether you get the train, whether you get the tube, whatever like that. And if that's not a great journey, then before you go into your house, especially if you're if you live on your own, or if you have family or whatever, then that's another scene. So you don't take your day into home with you. And then again, if you do have to work at home, for example, and you go to your office or whatever that looks like, and then once you again reconnect with your family again, that's another scene. So before you leave your office, or before you shut your thing down for the evening, whatever's happened in that that time, you're not taking it into interaction with your loved one. So it's about having these scenes, and each scene is finishing before you start the next one.
So I've been now working remote for a while, and every now and then I have to go somewhere, and then there is traffic and you're being late. I will have like this high anxiety. So basically, if you're going every day to the office and then you have let's say a meeting, and then there is like traffic or whatever, and you're stuck, and that can affect that. But maybe one other thing I would like to also go over is basically, so I've been going to therapy for a while now. A year or so or something like that. And then something that I have learned is that basically stress has to go somewhere. So, and you in a way don't want the stress to go to your family. So meaning it doesn't have to go to your children, to your wife, your partner, or let's say you're a manager, so your employees or subordinates. So you don't want the stress to go there. So in a way, what basically one is that you can of course regulate stress, like you mentioned, meditation. What I have also done is like sometimes if the anxiety or stress is high, like then I would just go into my bed, there is this app called Headspace, I just put the track like 15 minutes on, eyes closed, listen and breathe and whatever they tell you to do, and then it's like magic, it's gone. Basically you get your cortisol low, and then like you said, your nervous system. So that can work but also like you have to have this like social system. Like in the therapy theory is that your stress should go to your parents. So meaning, but I think a lot of people don't have close relationships with their parents, and at some point, of course, like they will be gone. So the next step probably can be that maybe you have some very good close. It can be maybe your partner, your wife, or your husband, or you have some very good friends where you can basically go and ventilate and get the stress off. Like and the next step can be that you have a professional like a therapist or somebody. So a place where you basically can unload the stress, because otherwise it can like over the years or over the time it can get super big. I very interesting thing. I met one person quite recently who was able to basically, usually like people when they burn out, they recover in few like 6 months or 1 year or something like that. But he was able to basically be in the high stress environment for like 20 years, and then eventually he burned out. And then I asked like, have you recovered? Like he said no, and it has been like over 3 years. So if you basically prolong it for a very long time, like some people can maintain it for a super long time, but then the recovery will be super long. So
Yeah, because in a lot of ways, you're burning out your adrenal system, and this is where people, obviously, as you mentioned, like can't have a difficulty feeling certain things or feel quite numb inside, or if you say introduce gratitude practice to them, and they say I can't feel grateful all the time because again the program themselves to be a certain way, and it's very difficult to change that. But ultimately, you've burnt out your adrenal system, and it's going to take a little bit of time for that to readjust really. And so it is really important to have these things in place, because it impacts, as you say, impacts you in the future of how your life is going to take. But also it does impact people around you as well. Sometimes you don't have that benefit, that knowledge really, and sometimes you get to a certain stage where your relationships aren't very good, or you don't have great friendships, and you suddenly look like, well, why is this the case, or why is this happening, or and a lot of it, when we have to understand, is that a lot of it's all us. But we have to take 100% responsibility for our life. So if we don't have the life we want, it's really down to ourselves really, and that can be a challenging thing, because mostly in society we're programmed another way, that it's this or it's that, or it's or people naturally empathize with certain things, which can be very good, and having that compassion. But sometimes we do need someone to say, hang on a minute, you're causing this by the way you're acting, on your thoughts, your thinking, and the way you're being. And some people don't, it's very hard for people sometimes to have that honesty. And so I think it can be difficult if you're relying on a partner or your parents, because they'll look at it from their lens a little bit. I think the biggest change I ever had was when I worked with someone who was completely neutral, like didn't know anything about me, had there was no connection, because they're not coming with any prehistory. And I think that can be the challenge with certain things, is if you're relying on like a parents who have known you for a certain period of time, they might say that they might just say certain things like, "I'll get over it," or "do this," or "don't worry about that," or they'll have so much self-empathy and compassion because they love you so much, which is great, but they're not then going to push you to change. They're just they're going to kind of let you run out this habit, because they maybe don't have that strongness to say, this is this is happening because of this and this. And a partner sometimes, it's difficult really, because obviously you want them to be your partner, not sort of to be your therapist, right? So I think it can be difficult if it's great having a support network and friends and stuff like that, but I think sometimes, personally anyway, the biggest change I had is when there was just someone who's completely neutral, had no history around yourself. Because I think friends are the same. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, every group of friends is different. It's great to chat to people, but I know growing up, and the friends I have, they wouldn't have had the tool set or the knowledge really. They would. I grew up in a time like I guess the 80s type stuff. That there's stiff upper lip, get on with it, whatever. That man up, whatever. And so they wouldn't have had really the tool set to be able to cope with certain situations. And or it'd be like drink through it, right? Drink more alcohol and have a laugh and go partying or do this. That's kind of the thing. What it was, it's like, let's go clubbing or let's do that, which is good at a certain point of time, but at a certain time that's only going to lead you down another slippery slope. So I think it's being aware in certain situations really, that actually getting some external help, someone who's completely neutral to the whole situation and to your life, can be very beneficial.
I have a funny, I don't know if it's funny, but how I see alcohol, or at some point, like, so I think from 25 or so. So I used to also do this, that weekend comes, you go party and do stuff, like, so basically this is one of the ways to cope with life, like, but at some point for me, it felt like escaping the reality. So I go party, I get drunk, and then for a while, for some time, I can be somebody else or be somewhere else, like, and I have heard some other people saying about it. It's in a way like escaping the reality, and of course, every now and then I do take a drink and then have some fun, but not like in a weekly basis. So
in certain instances and all that type of stuff, it's completely fine to do. I mean, I personally I don't drink anymore, but that is just a personal choice, and it's just down to the fact that I really enjoy exercise and really enjoy feeling good. And obviously when naturally when you sort of drink, you don't feel as good. But yes, I think there's nothing wrong with it, but ultimately if you are having having difficulties, and escapism is alcohol, then it's to say it helps in the moment, maybe helps in that evening, but obviously the next day is terrible, and it just feel worse. And even then, obviously you probably even feel even worse than you did even before, because obviously you're with a hangover, or you're just massively dehydrated, or you just say, I feel awful, can't leave the house, can't leave my sofa, whatever. And it's a little, because you're not actually changing anything, like you're not changing anything internally. And it's the same a little bit with things like antidepressants and stuff like that. They help in the moment. They help to stop you having easy access to negative thoughts. But the challenge is with it is it's not changing anything. It's actually fundamentally not changing anything. You're just putting like a plaster on it, and it's helping because you're not having these easy access. But the challenge then, and I've seen it so many times with people, is that then they spend like 15, 20 years on antidepressants, and they get to the strongest ones and they don't work anymore because, and then they're very difficult to then get off those because they've never actually changed anything in reality. It's just helped in that moment. So I always say, if you're reliant on anything outside of yourself to help yourself, you're always at a disadvantage.
yeah, one thing I want to add on top of that, getting the stress off. So sometimes you need somebody just to listen. You understand what you're going through, so you need empathy and then so on. But if you basically want to make a change, and then there is something that is basically causing all the things that you have in your life, and usually there is like, if you take a pill or whatever, it basically cures the symptoms, but it doesn't cure what is basically making it to happen. So definitely going to a professional. It can be coach, it can be therapist, it can be whatever. Like maybe there is some other ways. So somebody professional who has the tools and who can help you figure out what is causing those behaviors that you have.
Yeah, it is important because I think listening is such a great skill to have, and a lot of people don't have it. People like listen to respond, and you see it a lot. People, if you say something, people are instantly thinking in their head, like, how can I respond to this? How does my experience, what could I offer this conversation? So they're already thinking in their head. They're not presently listening to someone. They're thinking, what's my next question, or what's my answer, or what have I done which can can come back on. So like someone could say, oh yeah, I've just done this ultra marathon, blah 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 blah, and you could say, oh, I did the ultra marathon, blah blah blah. So you instantly respond because you had experience of doing something similar. Whereas you're actually not really listening to that person. You're listening to respond. And so a lot of people don't have that skill. You know, it is actually it's a very rare people. Someone who actually can listen and actually is present with you is a very unique skill, and not a lot of people have it at all. And you really do need that someone who is actually just gonna listen to you, but not listening then adding their layer onto the response. And that's what most people do. If you speak to a certain person, could be a loved one who are close to you, they're listening to respond, or they're listening to give you advice. And sometimes that's not what you need. All you need is someone just to listen, because sometimes the most powerful thing is you listening, because when someone speaks and speaks openly, vulnerably, they sometimes have their own realizations, their own cognitions when they're actually speaking to someone. And that's really powerful. Sometimes they speak enough and no one really says anything back, but they're speaking and speaking. And then suddenly they have this this cognition to think, oh, because they've got it out of their head and they're speaking to someone who's just being present and listening. It's a very powerful thing. Whereas, again, some people will say something and then they'll respond, and you have this sort of more two-way dialogue. And it can be very beneficial, but sometimes actually being with someone who's just listening, you can sometimes come to your own realizations and cognitions that way.
Yeah, definitely. Listening is hard. I'm trying to learn it also because there is this intention to give advice and then solve people's problem. Actually, they don't want or need the solving, they need listening. So, what are the essential steps to recover from burnout? So if somebody wasn't able to prevent it, then they're in the spot that they actually are burned out.
So what I do say to people in these those situations is, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, like a lot of it is because you're operating at such a high level. Your brain waves are at such a high beta level, so you can't creatively think. So you need to start lowering your brain waves. You need to start calming your nervous system. So again, I use the car analogy because we all know that if you sit in the car and you just press in the accelerator and you're revving the engine, then it's a high stress on the engine, and it's the same as your body. Like you've put it to a certain extent, but when you're lived in that state for such a long period of time, you've ultimately burnt out your adrenals. So how can you start to change that? Well, again, it's a lot around is to the like a gratitude type practice is very key. Like how can you start calming your nervous system, get out of that fight or flight response, and so breathing exercises I think are really important, which I've spoken about. That's that sort of 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, all through the nose. Do that 10 times. Again, lowering your brain waves, calming your nervous system. I think having some positive self-talk, I think, is very key. This is one of the problems I see with people is that the way they speak to themselves or their internal dialogue is so negative, is so disempowering, that how can they stop that? So I say to people have some strong I am statements, because I am is a very powerful statement. So it could be, I am confident, or I am the best, or I am powerful, or I am content, or I am peaceful, I am blissful, I am joyful, all these type of things, whatever it is for you. But having these kind of I am statements along with the breath work is very good. Meditation, that's another key thing, is to be able to have that silence. There's apps out there, as you say, Headspace one, Calm's another one. Obviously we're on YouTube, but sometimes actually you don't need any of that. You sometimes actually, as what I mentioned, if you just sit and focus, you can focus on somewhere in the body. Sometimes I always focus on my nose at the tip. So, because obviously when the air comes in, it's, it has that sort of cool sensation, and out is a warmer sensation. And so you just focus there. Some people, you could be focusing on your belly because it moves in and out. But you have to set a focus of what it is. and it can be, obviously naturally challenging, but they set that focus. And even if you just like, again, just focus on your breath and just close your eyes and breathe. You can do that for like 20. If you can do that for like 20 minutes, that's quite a hard thing to do at the beginning. But if it's just like 5 or 10 minutes, 2 times a day, that's really powerful. Getting out in nature, I think, is important. Obviously, if you live in the city, then maybe a park, but getting amongst nature is very important. I always say to people, look above your eye line, because sometimes people, especially if they, are feeling down about themselves, then they maybe just generally look down. We're more gravitational. Whereas I always say to people to look up, look at the buildings or look at the trees and look upwards. That's that really helps. And then journaling, being able to just, journal your feelings, journal your thoughts. And you want to feel those. I always say to people, you want to feel your feelings. You want to acknowledge your feelings, but you don't want to accept them, but you want to acknowledge them. You don't want to suppress them. You don't want to feel wrong for feeling a certain way, because it's, you want to feel those feelings and you want to acknowledge those, but you don't want to, you don't want to accept them. So it's about deconstructing that whole older narrative of living in a fearful type state. Because what we do have to understand, and what I do say to my clients is, we do have a 2 million old brain. We're wired for fear. We're wired for survival, because that's what we grew up from our ancestors. If we lived in an age of saber-toothed tigers and dinosaurs and stuff like that, so we could be eaten. So we were always constantly, the brain was already, and the amygdala was always constantly, scanning for things that could go wrong. Obviously, we don't live in that era now, but what is the threat? Well, the threat is generally, it could be a credit card bill, it could be a bank balance, it could be an overwhelm with work, requirements to fill, people to find. And so we're instantly, we're fearful of what could happen. We're actually not being in the present, thinking creatively of how we can deal with that particular thing at the time. So those are the kind of the key things to look for. So, and I always say to people, there's actually 3 basic things you need to do to have a positive life. It's how well you eat. So what you eat and what you put into your body is so important. How well you breathe, which I've discussed today, but how often you laugh, which people generally forget about. They don't do it often enough. Like, I always say to people, introduce laughter into your day. You could be watching something on YouTube. It could be watching some stand-up on TV. Sometimes it's just laughing. Sometimes I do it that with my clients of the day. I just told them about laughing, and I literally just started like laughing out loud, and instantly it's contagious. They just started laughing. We had nothing to laugh about, but it was just contagious. And that's a real thing. Again, it gets you into the present, and you just, releases those positive chemicals, energies. There's a powerful book out there. I can't remember what it's called now, but it was a guy, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So he didn't really have long to live. And so what he said is he's just going to laugh his way to the end game, really. And did it, and choose laughter. And he ended up being in remission, because he changed the body state. Like, a lot of the body state, internally is quite acidic. And a lot of people have quite a lot of acid in their body, whereas you actually, if you can get it to more of an alkaline state, neutrality, no disease can grow there. So it's important. So that eating, breathing, laughing are 3 things that actually are very, very basic. But if you actually introduce those into your day, make a massive difference.
It's super common, I think, to take some time off if it's possible.
Of course, yeah, that's kind of obviously, kind of mandatory, really. I mean, I don't know obviously as much now, but obviously my previous work was at Meta, so but I think in general businesses now, they have a lot in place, be it on the times off, or certain days which you can take off, or mental health type days. There's a lot in there. There's a lot now around which companies offer. So definitely always look to maximize those and have those those times out. And look, we know that sometimes in days are going to be busier than others, or sometimes we may have to work a weekend, or we may have to do a Saturday, or we may have to do a Sunday. I mean, that's the nature of, it's where sometimes life can be, but it's not getting into a habit or pattern that becomes consistent. Or if you do say, right, I'm going to, obviously it depends if you work for yourself or you work for an employer, but if you do work or have to work on a Sunday to catch up on certain things, that's fine. But then just if it's then take the Monday off, if you can do that. If you can't do that, then just be very regimented. Say, right, 2 hours today. Like I used to do it in the evenings on a Sunday when you say, right, I'm going to block out 6 to 8 and I'm going to work and do what I need to do. But that's my cutoff, 8 o'clock finish. That's it. I'm done. I'm not going to suddenly spend, it's 9 o'clock. Oh, no, it's 10 o'clock. No, it'd be very regimented with what you do. Because, I mean, we all know life happens, and sometimes the best plans don't always, work out. And it's being flexible as well, to that.
Yeah. So what I wanted to mention about is, like, of course, if you can take more time off, it's in a way easier, but sometimes for whatever reason, maybe you can't. So even if you can take maybe a month or few weeks off, that can like help to maybe get some stress like lower. So you need to lower your stress, and then I think it's building the habits that help you, and then maintaining those habits. So for me, definitely exercise is one of the things. So I very often, like when I'm in a bad spot, I start to do like these marathons and stuff like that. Because there is this effect that, of course, it's it of course the health gets better, you get more energy, but also you're in a way like getting to that point that you're starting to increase your like mental fatigue. Like, so in the beginning, of course, you have to start low and going step by step. You can't go super big after you have burned out, but slowly, like building those habits, and maintaining those habits actually in like 6 months can have a like quite big effect. I can give my own example. Actually, last year I had a super hard year, and I was I think very close to burnout, or I already was burnout. So in December I almost took the whole December off, and then I started to slowly like because I couldn't even exercise anymore. I would get sick, and I couldn't anymore push hard. But now basically it's May, and then last Saturday I ran 21 kilometers, like half marathon. So I'm training for the Ironman.
Oh, awesome! That's great.
So like 5 months ago, I was like, fuck, I can't do anything. Like I'm so like exhausted, but then I took some time off, like, and I started to build my habits again, and getting my health back and getting my energy back, and then slowly like building, like just doing a little bit more every week, and then now I'm in a quite good spot again. Like, have like these small wins that you can achieve, so you can build your confidence, and in the long term you can actually achieve a lot.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very important. It's very interesting what you say there, because I think it's about, obviously the confidence is very important, and that's why you want to set yourself. I always say you want to set yourself up to win, and everyone's win is different. So if you're seeing someone doing X, Y, and Z, like for example, like running a marathon, you can't even do 5K, then they're at a different level of their journey. Everyone's different, and and everyone's doing different things, and it's not about comparing or someone else in their journey, because you don't really know what they're doing behind the scenes. Those are some of the signs. If you do like to exercise, but you're struggling to get out of bed, or you're having low energy, then there's something there. That's what I would call feedback. We live in a human body. We have a human body which is giving us feedback all the time, but most people ignore it. And that's the thing. Then you get these different warnings throughout that process, and then eventually you'll get to a stage where it's a hospitalization type situation, because you've got to a certain point, but you've missed the warning signs. It doesn't really go from here to here. You've just missed all the warning signs you've been given. And so, as you say, if you're getting to a point where you enjoyed exercise, but then suddenly you can't do this, you can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, and then eventually you can't do anything. Yeah, you've ultimately, that's the burnout side, because you've just, as you say, you've operated at such a level, your system's just burnt out. You burn out the adrenals, and it's very difficult because you lack motivation, you lack energy, and we're energy beings. Humans, we're just energy beings, and so so that's so super important. But there's warning signs before it gets to that stage, but sometimes you just miss them or you just ignore them. It's like what I say to some people. I use the analogy, like if you're driving down the freeway of life or the motorway, you have these things called the rumble strips down the side, so you don't veer off to down the verge or anything like that. So when we hit those rumble strips, we quickly turn back, and it's there because of that, for us to do that. But we go down the freeway of life, we hit a rumble strip. It could be a mild heart attack. It could be a loss of a relationship. It could be a loss of a job. It could be all these different things. And what do? We'll either take a drink of alcohol, we'll continue to eat the food, we'll ignore it, we'll turn up the music, and we'll just keep going down that path. And eventually you'll get another warning sign, and then suddenly, bang, your body will give up and say, no, enough's enough. But you've missed the warning signs, that's all. So it's about catching those warning signs earlier.
So that's it for the episode 11 of Relancer podcast. If you like this episode, feel free to subscribe and share it. Thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you next one.